Hello, everyone, and welcome back to RPS at Home. This is week 5, day 4. My name is Electa Barr, and I am a math teacher at Benford Middle School. So, we have been working on SOL 6.10, and we are working on today on part C again, compare circle graphs with the same data represented in bar graphs, pictographs, and line plots. The materials you will need today are paper, pencil, and calculator. So here is more of our vocabulary. We've been going through this all week. So we are just going more into comparing circle graphs to other types of graphs, such as bar graphs, pictographs, and line plots. So I gave you guys your question, your homework question from yesterday. So once again, let's see how you did. So this question stated, Paul counted the number of each color of the 40 cereal pieces that he had in his bowl. The results are shown in the circle below. So our task is to create a bar graph that could represent the same set of data. So as I asked for any other lesson, what do we know, guys? So, well, we know that we can convert percentages to decimals. We know that orange and red will have the most amount of pieces together. I will say that I know that this particular circle graph, the numbers are a little off, but we know that this is 25% for red, 25% for orange, 10% for green, 10% for purple, 20% for blue, and 10% for yellow. We also know that we can multiply a decimal by the whole to get the part. So that's really important. We can multiply any decimal times a total number or a whole number to get the part. So we know we have to create our table first. So what I've done is labeled the color. I've labeled the percentages. That's what was given to us. We were given percentages on that circle graph. And then here is where the math comes in. I'm going to take a percentage and I turned it into a decimal. So 10% is 0.1 as a decimal. And I multiplied it by my total, which was 40. He counted 40 pieces in total. So I do my decimal times my total to get my part, which was 4. I did the same thing for green, 10%, to get me a total of 4 pieces. I got 25% to give me a total of 10 pieces, excuse me. I got 25% to give me a total of 10. Yellow is 10% to get me 4 pieces, and blue was 20% to give me 8 pieces. So here is my bar graph. It does not quite matter how you might have labeled your graph, but you do want to make sure that your highest amounts are orange and red with both 10 pieces. You also want to make sure that your purple and green and yellow all have the same amount, which was 4 pieces, and blue was 8. All right, so we're going to continue with what we did yesterday, where we were working on comparing circle graphs with other types of graphs. So we're going to look at 2 examples today together, and then you all are going to work on 2 independently on your own. So here's example number 1. Laura has a bookcase in her room filled with various types of books. The graphics below illustrate the number of each type of book Laura owns. So here, what does the bar graph tell us? What does the circle graph tell us? What do we know from both of these 2 types of graphs? Well, we know that Laura has more comic books in her bookcase, which also makes up 50% of our circle graph. So do you guys see the relationship here? If I know that comic books are the most, in her bookcase based off of this bar graph, that means it should be the most in our circle graph. We also can see that fantasy books are the second highest bar and also makes up 25% or one-fourth of the books in our bookcase. So we see here that fantasy books are the second highest that she has. So that means it should be the second biggest piece in our circle graph. We also can tell that in this circle graph, remembering our parts, our fraction parts, this represents 1/4 of our circle graph, which is 25%. So how are we going to solve this problem? Well, since we know that fantasy books are the second most books that she has, that will make up this red section. So our answer is fantasy. Example number 2. Kim made a table of her monthly expenses. We have a circle graph here that is labeling her monthly budget. It says that the question is stating which graph represents the same data. So we're comparing a circle graph to a bar graph. We are going to ask our two questions. What do we know? What does the circle graph tell us? What does our bar graph tell us? Well, we know that the circle graph is going to tell us that all expenses are close in percentages. So we know that water and housing are both the same, 17%. Food is just one more percent, and electricity and free time are both in the 20s. We also see that housing and water are both 17%, so they should have the same amount on our bar graph. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we're going to kind of use some process of elimination first of finding the graph that represents electricity being the highest bar, and then we're going to see if which ones have housing and water with the same amount. So looking at option A, electricity is not the highest. So we can cross option A out. Then looking at B, same thing, electricity is not the highest bar here. Looking at option C, electricity is the highest. And looking at option D, electricity is not the highest. And then when we go into looking at housing and water, they want to be the same amount because they're the same amount in our circle graph. They're both 17%. So in option A, they are not the same amounts. In option C, they are the same amounts. Option D, they are not. And option B, they are not. So that leaves us with one solution, option C. All right, it is now time for you all to try to do a couple of problems on your own. Before I go to the next slide, these two problems, you might want to pause them so that you can solve them and then play the video again to get to the next problem. So here's problem number 1. The circle graph represents the amount of time Eliza spent on homework for each subject. Identify each bar graph that could represent the same set of data. And here's problem number 2. 6 members of a reading club meet for an hour to discuss a recent book they've read. The number of minutes each person spent talking during this meeting is illustrated in each of the graphs below. The bar graph below represents the same data. Complete the bar graph by labeling the horizontal axis. All right, let's get going with the solutions. So here in this particular problem, we're given Eliza's homework, which is a circle graph of English, science, history, and math. And then we're given 4 options to choose from. Now, make sure that you're paying attention in the question. It says identify each bar graph, which means there could be possibly more than one option. So, what do we know before we solve? We know that math and history make up 50% or one half of our circle graph. This will mean that they should have the same amount on the bar graph. We also see that science is one half of the amount for English. So when we're looking at our options here, we see that science in this first option is 4 number of hours and English is 8 number of hours. So that is double the amount for English. Same thing here in this option. Science is 6 number of hours and English is 12 number of hours. That is also double the amount. In this option, science is 6 number of hours and English is 15 number of hours. That is not double. 6 is not, I'm sorry, 15 is not double the amount of 6. And in this last option, science is 2 number of hours and English is 4 number of hours. That is double the amount. So let's do process of elimination. Which options would you all choose? This is a correct option. This is a correct option. And this is a correct option. All right, so in practice, in problem number 2, here we're going from a circle graph to a bar graph. So we want to compare, we want to make sure that we're representing the same data that's on the circle graph onto this bar graph. So what do we know? What do we know about this problem? Well, we know that we have to figure out what are the larger portions on the circle graph. We know that we can see that Maria and Bill look to have about the same exact amount, so they should have the bigger pieces of our bar graph. We can also see that Tom and Jack have about the same amount, and they look to have the smaller portions of our circle graph. So you want to continue that process for the other members. So Susie and Lewis look like they have the exact same amount. So they should be having the same amount of bars on their graph as well. So what is our solution? We have Maria and Bill. Then we will have Lewis and Susie. And lastly, we will have Jack and Tom. And then we've labeled our bar graph correctly. All right, guys, before we end our lesson, I do have 2 problems that I would like for you to work on. Number 1, it says the 6th grade class held elections for class president. This graph shows the results of the election. Which circle graph best represents the same set of data? So we're going from a bar graph to a circle graph again. If you would like to see this problem a little bigger, then the link is also on the learning page for this particular problem. And then problem number 2, students were asked where their favorite vacation place is located. The results are shown in the circle graph. Which table represents the data in the graph? So here we're going from a circle graph to a table this time. So also with this particular problem, the link will also be found on the learning page. As always, please make sure to check your Dreambox to do some assignments. Make sure you want to spend about 10 to 15 minutes per assignment on Dreambox. All right, you all. You all have a safe day, and I will check back in tomorrow for day 5. Bye-bye.